Hello everyone, welcome to the second season of Design Inspire Talks. I'm Kadambari Sahu, your host, founder of Design Inspire platform and SVP Design at ValueLabs. Design Inspire is an initiative to connect designers across the global design community, and Design Inspire Talks is a presentation and discussion series with passionate, innovative, and inspiring designers. It dives deep into their passion, inspiration, and what makes them go. It is an effort to understand how they are navigating their career path and how they are investing their creative energies. We believe hearing their bold moves and inspiring stories will ignite interest and inspire the next generation of budding designers across the globe. So let's go forward with our guest today, Katie Swindler. Katie is a user experience strategist who writes and speaks on topics related to human centered design. She brings a unique perspective to digital work and believes that if brands wish to connect with consumers, they must combine emotion, utility, storytelling, and technology to fulfill genuine human needs. Katie was a UX director at FCB Chicago and leads the experience strategy for Allstate Insurance consumer-facing websites. She headed the 2016 global redesign of jackdaniels.com and leading UX design for many other clients such as Cox Communication, Meow Mix, etc. Katie has spoken on UX topics internationally on topics such as SXSW, Interactive, IXD Interaction, etc. She is currently working with Rosenfield Media on a book that is set for release in late 2021. Hello, Katie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
So first part of the show is presentation of your choice. We can't wait to hear what you have stories for us.
Thanks. So if it's my choice, I'm probably going to want to talk about my latest obsession, the book you mentioned. I'm writing a book. I've been doing tons of research. The topic is life and death design. So looking at the human stress response and what designers want to know about the human stress response. So I'm going to share my screen. I've gathered some of my favorite stories and case studies from the book to share with you all today. I can start whenever you're ready. Should I go?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So here is a spacesuit. Yes. There are 28 layers of protection in this spacesuit. And that is actually all that stands between that astronaut and a gruesome death in the vacuum of space. Now, all 28 layers are soft and flexible. And that's important because back during the space race between the US and Russia, NASA engineers considered both hard and soft suit designs. And the engineers actually had this really strong preference for hard suits because they were so much easier to build to these really precise specifications. But tests of these suits in simulated gravity revealed how clumsy the astronauts became while wearing the suits. If an astronaut fell on the moon while wearing a hard suit, he might be stuck like a turtle on his back. The soft suit design was being proposed by a new player in the aerospace design world, International Latex Corporation, or ILC. And to convince the NASA engineers that their designs were ready for the moon, they made a video of their own, showing one of their engineers playing football in one of their suits, American football, that is. Now, this brilliant piece of propaganda, along with some very impressive results from the testing lab, finally convinced NASA to go with the soft, flexible suits for the Apollo missions. What gave the engineers at ILC the edge was that they knew to get the most out of human performance, we have to build systems that accentuate our strengths and shore up our weaknesses. Now, it might be interesting to know that ILC was actually an offshoot of another much more well-known company that actually makes a business out of shoring up human bodies, Playtex, the women's bra manufacturer. When ILC won the NASA contract, they actually pulled the best seamstresses right off the Playtex bra and girdle production line to sew the Apollo suits, because these women were the ones who understood the intimate connection between the suit and the humans who would wear them. Now, very few of us design for astronauts, but we all design for humans. And like those bra makers, having an intimate understanding of human beings is key to being able to do our jobs well. There are a handful of drivers at the root of human behavior that are shared by pretty much every person on our planet. The drive to find food, shelter, a mate. And then there is our topic today, stress. In some ways, it's the great uniter. every human experiences it, which means there's a very good chance your users will be experiencing it when they use the products you design. When you think about designing for stress, you may think about fields like healthcare or the military or aviation. And in these fields, the human factors of stress and design are very well studied. But there are plenty of other industries that need designers to be able to design for stressed out users. Maybe the products are intended for other types of high stress users like day traders or customer service representatives. Maybe the products have features used in isolated moments of anticipated high stress, like after a car accident. Or maybe the intent of the product shouldn't be stressful at all, but your user nevertheless comes to it in a stressed out mental state, especially while working from home during a pandemic. So the good news is, if a stressed person can use your design, anyone can use it. Designing for your most stressed users should only improve the experience for all of your users. There are 4 main ways to approach designing for the human stress response. In some ways, you can harness it. An adrenaline rush is a powerful force of nature, and a smart design can put it to use in a critical moment. In other cases, you're going to want to suppress it, either decreasing it or avoiding it altogether. Now, if you're unable to accomplish the first 2, you may try to protect your users. If panic has set in, they can't be trusted to protect themselves, so it becomes your responsibility. And finally, calm. You can use design to comfort users after a stressful event and help get them back into a place where they can be their best selves again. So let's start out by looking at some specific examples, starting with harnessing the amazing human potential that is sometimes unlocked in the moment of crisis, also known as dad reflexes. If you Google dad reflexes, there are hundreds of examples of dudes saving their offspring from terrible injury or certain death through purely reflexive reactions. You might think that parenthood somehow unlocks some superpowers in these guys, but the fact of the matter is, it was always in them. These reflexes were waiting inside each of us. So how do we as designers harness these superpowers? Well, first, we have to understand under what types of circumstances can our reflexes actually help. As of the 2012 games, the Olympics no longer use starter pistols to signal the start of a race. This is in part because researchers at the University of Alberta proved that the runners who were right next to the starter pistol got an unfair advantage, their startle reflex. That bang of the starting gun helped them get off the starting block an average of 18 milliseconds faster than runners who were further away. Now, that isn't much. A millisecond is 1/1000th of a second. But in the world of high performance sports, that actually can be the difference between silver and gold. But not all types of movement is increased by a startle reflex. In a study comparing the speed of movement for arms and fingers, they showed that the speed boost shows up for the arm movement. You can see here on the left, the time's getting lower and lower as the startle is introduced. But in the finger study on the right, triggering the startle reflex has no benefit. The time just flatlines. And in fact, the stiffness in fingers that comes from stress decreases accuracy. And that's because the startle reflex is really great at helping us with gross motor movements to do things like run and punch. But it actually makes it harder to do things like clicking tiny buttons. So I was nerding out about this research with another designer, and I was telling her about all the stuff I found about how it gets harder to press small buttons when you're stressed. And she gets really still. And she says to me, "I know exactly what you're talking about." And then she tells me this story. So she and her kids were home. It was this nice summer day. And she's upstairs cleaning. And her little 4-year-old son is following her around from room to room. They were in the bedroom. She pops out of the bedroom for a second to grab something. She comes back into the bedroom and the room is empty. And the window is open and the screen is out of the window. And she said, "I knew exactly what had happened." And she runs over to the window and she looks down and he is lying still on the pavement 2 stories below. She starts freaking out. She starts screaming his name. She runs down the stairs. She has the presence of mind to grab the cordless phone on her way through the kitchen and runs out to the backyard and is kneeling down beside him. And he is lying still. He's unresponsive. He's breathing, but he's not responding to her. And she looks down at the phone in her hand and her fingers are so stiff she can barely hold it. And she's looking at it. And she said, I'll never forget, she said this to me. She said, Katie, I couldn't find the 9. She couldn't call 911 because she couldn't find the 9 on the phone. So her older son had heard her screaming, came over to find out what was going on. And she looked at him and she holds out the phone and she says, you have to do it. You have to call 911. So it was her 8-year-old son who called the ambulance that day. He saved his brother's life. Now, the kid is fine. He's 14-year-old. The story has a happy ending. There's no lasting damage. The kid is totally recovered. His mother remembers it like it was yesterday, but that was 10 years ago. And sadly, in that decade, phones have only gotten harder to use. I mean, think about all the screens you have to unlock and navigate through to get to your phone keypad. And today, more than 80% of the emergency calls made are made on mobile phones. The good news is designers have come up with a pretty decent solution to this design challenge. It's on iPhones and it's called SOS, and it works something like this.
You simply press the on-off button, the one on the right side of the phone, 5 times quickly. It's going to do 2 things: sound an alarm and call 911.
Now, there are some issues with this particular solution. There are reports coming out that there's been a spike in false calls to emergency services, so definitely some things to work out. But setting that aside and looking just at the design itself, this is actually pretty well done when it comes to designing for the stress response. It uses the largest button on the phone for that gross motor movement. And the movement that's required is something the human body kind of already wants to do. That rapid pressing of the button, that's actually something we call panic clicking. It's a type of tense shaking hand, the movement that the hand's already kind of prone to do when you're tensed up like that. It also provides clear and immediate feedback. That whoop sound, I mean, that is instantly recognizable as an emergency related sound. And the visuals are also very clear. Of course, there is a major miss in this design. There is nothing on the phone that tells me that this is a feature or how to use it. It's not standardized from device to device, and there has been very little public education done. So this solution, as good as it is, could still learn a few lessons from what I think of as the granddaddy of all life and death designs, the emergency stop button. Simple, iconic. It's been in use in factories around the world for more than 50 years. I mean, what makes this design so successful? Well, it works with our ingrained survival instincts. It's got that distinctive red color that stands out from all the other buttons around it. It's big and it's got that really unique shape that protrudes up off the panel. This is a button that's made to be slapped like you're on a game show. It's totally taking advantage of that gross motor improvement. But perhaps most importantly, it's standardized and highly regulated. One of the reasons the color red has such a strong association with stop around the world is because of this very button. But of course, harnessing good instincts isn't just about making a button easy to press. It's also important to understand how the human mind processes information. Now, just like machines, humans have a limited capacity to process information. But unlike machines, we don't slow down or freeze up when we have a lot of info to process. We have a much better coping mechanism. We filter. In a neurotypical brain, at least, we automatically prioritize the most important information and simply ignore the rest of it. This is what I would consider a human superpower, and machines haven't even come close to matching it. One of the worst things that a machine can do is to interrupt this power by prioritizing non-emergency events with emergency level alarms. But unfortunately, a 2013 study actually found that 72 to 99% of clinical alarms that sound on medical devices are false alarms. Medical staff are constantly bombarded by meaningless alerts, causing chronic alarm fatigue. And alarm fatigue has been linked to many fatalities, and improving alarm design has become the focus of patient safety groups around the world. Designers in this field are experimenting with creating more intuitive auditory signals. Instead of an endless, meaningless barrage of beeps, these sound icons use recognizable sounds from daily life and pair them with an associated alert concept. For instance, the sound of a tea kettle might tell you your patient's temperature is getting too high. It might sound something like this. I'm going to play that one more time. Okay, now this one is for an abnormal heart rate. And then this one is for breathing issues, respiratory issues. Or if Darth Vader is attacking the Death Star, that also same alarm. Studies are showing promising results for these icons, showing them to be understood faster and with much more accuracy than beeping alarms. Designs like this that lean on intuitive understanding over complexity and working memory are going to do a much better job of harnessing any benefits that come from the stress or startle response. Okay, so I have to admit, as much as I love the idea of harnessing the power of stress for good, usually when we think about designing for stress, we're thinking about ways to reduce it or suppress it. Even designers in the gaming industry who flirt with adding stressful moments into their storylines don't want to trigger a full fight or flight reaction because people tend to lose their minds and they can hurt themselves. There are 3 factors you need to consider and balance when trying to suppress a startle response. The first is novelty. This is just how new or unexpected something is. Then there's intensity. Obviously, loudness is a big factor here, but it can also be an intensely scary visual, which is, I'm sure, what this poor family here is facing. And then there's finally rise time. One of the best ways to keep from startling someone is to introduce a change more gradually. You should be able to eliminate a startle through a balance of these factors, but if you are unable to affect these due to circumstances, you are left with one more tactic, and that is training. This is a specialty of our US military. They have dumped billions of dollars into figuring out the most effective types of training to get the peak performance out of soldiers, even in extremely high stress situations. And these techniques can be used to develop training materials for anyone in a high or low stress job. They're just training techniques. So to create an effective training, it's important to understand the different ways people learn. When you learn something in a classroom setting or through a video like this, you are mostly learning that fact in your analytical mind. You're engaging your prefrontal cortex. It's right here in your forehead. This is a type of learning that is unique to humans. We can learn how to do something simply by hearing a story that happened to someone else. That's pretty cool. The other way to learn, of course, is to actually do the thing. This is how most creatures learn new skills, including humans. When we learn something this way, it does get logged in the prefrontal cortex, but it also gets logged in the hippocampus. And because those memories live in our midbrain, they are very close to our primal cord, actually sits just above our spinal cord. When our stress spikes, oxygen is redirected from our extremities to our cores, and it happens all over our bodies, and it causes trade-offs. So like our fingers get really clammy and stiff, but our arms get super powered for punching. And in our brains, the exact same thing is happening. The oxygen is directed away from the outer areas, like our prefrontal cortex, to that centrally located hippocampus. And what this means is, in a time of crisis, the voice of our intuition gets a megaphone, while our logic and reason can get really hard to hear. Sometimes our soldiers refer to this as the fog of war. As our stress levels rise, it can actually get hard to even access lessons that were learned in the classroom. And that's why it's so important that they put these soldiers through training about when to shoot somebody or not to shoot somebody when they are on their feet with a weapon in their hand. It's how it gets logged into the right part of the brain. And anyone designing training that is teaching people to perform well in a stressful situation can utilize these exact same lessons. Hands-on training, critical. And then you also want lots of repetition and fast feedback mechanisms. And that's why those digital simulators are so effective, because you can get both of those things. And then finally, the more realistic the simulations are, the better. it's actually a good thing to get the heart pumping a little bit and get them a little stressed, because if they are learning something in that mental state, they'll be able to access those memories again when they return to that mental state in the field. Now, whenever we develop training, we as designers have a responsibility to think carefully about what we are training into people. So CPR training is taught around the world to empower bystanders to intervene if somebody is having a heart attack. In the US, about half the population is actually trained in CPR. And by far the most common practice dummy used in those trainings looks just like this. Now I'm going to share a statistic with you. It's a little game we can play. Let's see if you can figure out what this CPR dummy is missing. So the statistic is 45% of men receive CPR from bystanders, but only 39% of women will receive CPR from a stranger, sorry. Only 39% of women will receive CPR from a stranger. So do you know why? It's because this mannequin has no boobs. To properly administer CPR to a woman, you are supposed to rip open her shirt and then put your hand directly over her left breast. The fear to be seen to do something inappropriate holds many people back from taking this critical action. They are unsure. They have never trained for this particular situation and it feels real wrong. But of course, that's their intuitive assessment at work. If we think about it logically, of course, we would know that a woman would rather live than have her modesty protected. But in that moment, when she falls to the ground, it's not our logic and reason at the forefront. It is our intuition. It feels wrong. And so we hesitate, we freeze. To tackle this problem, the creative team at Joan, working with the United States of Women, developed Whoa Mannequin, a low-cost wrap that can be easily added to a male CPR dummy. This gives trainees a chance to learn proper technique, get over their discomfort in the classroom, and be empowered to save more women's lives. If you are designing training programs or materials, think carefully about the bias that may be lurking in your training. Biases only get stronger when we're running on instinct. So hands-on training is actually one of the best ways to help your users overcome those biases. Okay, but what about those times we can't train our users? We can't suppress their fight or flight. We can't harness it. They are gripped by panic and they are headed towards disaster. How do we protect them in those moments? Well, one option, of course, is a full system takeover. This is where a lot of the driver safety systems are headed these days. But it's actually fairly rare for a designer to be able to design an experience in a situation where full automation is possible. More often as designers, we have to predict what a user's survival instinct will compel them to do and build our safety system into these predictably irrational behaviors. So easy. Okay, maybe not. But it is a bit easier when we understand the effect stress has on human behavior. The chemical that has the largest impact on our behavior when we're stressed is cortisol. And it actually has a wide range of effects on our brain. First, it helps us make faster decisions, but this means we are also giving less careful considerations to those decisions. It also pushes us to see things in black and white because it helps us make decisions faster, but it also reduces creative thinking and reduces our problem-solving abilities. It also makes it harder to understand and learn new things and harder to retain the things that we do learn. And finally, it makes us more aggressive. So altogether, it is a chemical that degrades our decision-making process overall. So how do we protect users from making a bad decision in a moment of stress? I sat down with a designer recently who thinks about this a lot. Jackie Wolf, she's the one in plaid there. She is a UX researcher at Michigan Medicine. A couple years ago, a doctor of pediatric oncology approached Jackie's team with a problem. The researcher had done a survey of parents of children with cancer who had enrolled in a clinical trial at their center. And that survey came back with some fairly concerning results. Only 50% of the parents or guardians that took the survey could explain the goal of the trial. 66% were unaware that they had an alternative, and 1 in 5 didn't even realize that their child was enrolled. So to understand how this could happen, it's important to understand the experience of these parents. When a child is diagnosed with cancer, treatments will typically begin within a few days. Those first 48 hours are a whirlwind for parents. They've often been in the hospital for days on end. They are sleep deprived, and they have just received one of the scariest diagnoses a parent can hear. Your child has cancer. Their brains are practically soaking in cortisol at this point. In this state, they are approached by clinicians asking the parents if they would consider enrolling their child in a clinical trial. The decision has to be made before treatment begins. So at most, they'll get one night to review a dense and highly technical 30-page consent disclosure agreement, and then a decision has to be made. So clinical trials like these have taken the survival rate of childhood leukemia from 35% to nearly 90% in the last 50 years. Obviously, the upside for humanity is great, but would you sign your sick child up for an experiment? This is a difficult decision to make. And if the parents do agree to sign up, it's critical from an ethical standpoint that the parents understand what it is that they are agreeing to. So now enter Jackie's team. They have to create a tool to give terrified, sleep-deprived parents a proper crash course in phase 3 clinical trials. What even is a phase 3 clinical trial? So a phase 3 clinical trial means that they are studying small changes to a standard treatment. There's no placebo. Every child will get a treatment. After a child is diagnosed, that's the first step, and enrolled in a clinical trial, the kid is randomly placed in an arm of the experiment. That child will receive either the standard treatment or the standard treatment plus a slight change that the researchers are testing to see if it will improve patient outcomes. These trials are studying very small improvements. Usually they're looking for just like a 1 or 2% improvement in survival, or sometimes it's just a reduction in side effects that they're looking for. Now, if parents decline to take part in the trial, that is totally fine, and their child receives the standard treatment. Okay, so I just taught this concept to you using a chart that Jackie and her team designed. This was the original chart that was given to parents to explain that process. Yeah, you can see what the problem is here. When faced with the challenge of teaching something that complex to these parents, Jackie wanted to make sure she got this right. So she turned for help to her old friend, the library. After hitting the stacks and reviewing dozens of studies, there were a few key insights that stood out to Jackie and her teammates. The first thing that they were surprised to learn was that there was no statistical difference between people's ability to learn via various mediums. Video, print, digital websites, all of these mediums have similar comprehension and retention rates, at least for learning about clinical trials. Now, what did help was if something was interactive. Even turning pages or clicking things rather than just passively watching helped a lot. They also found showing a mix of words and images really helped. You also want to break content up into short bite-sized chunks. And finally, it really improved retention if people could relate to the content through a human lens, things like conversational language and characters they could identify with. Jackie put all of these insights together and came up with, I think, a pretty clever solution: comics. She storyboarded out a conversation between parents and a doctor. And this solution is actually a perfect fit for all the research. It chunks out the information. It uses a conversational tone. It's interactive, so users are clicking through each panel. It has characters, and they are purposefully drawn in a way that invites readers to project themselves onto them. Now, I wish that I could tell you the results of this new design, but this work is actually so fresh that the data is still being analyzed. But anecdotally and just heuristically, it's getting really excellent feedback so far. I'm hoping to see the final results soon. Okay, so finally, we are at calm. The moment of crisis has passed, but the chemicals that flooded our bloodstream don't just disappear when the danger recedes. Cortisol and adrenaline have to be filtered out by our kidneys and liver, just like if you'd taken a drug or alcohol. This can take anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes or so. And these chemicals continue to affect people's behavior throughout the recovery period. We've talked about these effects: poor decision-making, reduced cognition, increased aggression. The question is there anything designers can do during this recovery period to help people reclaim their sense of calm? Well, some research done in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attack on the World Trade Centers in New York may provide some answers. Social scientists discovered something new about human behavior, looking at people's behavior after the event. You see, based on all previous models of how they thought humans behave in a fight or flight situation, like a terrorist attack, everyone should have been running directly away from ground zero. But that is not precisely what happened. Humans ran, but they didn't run away as much as they ran toward the people they cared about. Parents ran to pick their children up from school, even if that meant heading closer to ground zero. People saw others hurt and bleeding and ran forward to help get them to safety. Coworkers who needed to evacuate the building took the time to gather everyone in their team together before heading down the stairs as a group. And researchers see this behavior over and over in tornadoes and hurricanes and floods and fires. We look out for our family and our neighbors before we run. Our instincts drive us to group up, to help where we can, and only then do we flee from danger. And this instinct is driven in large part because connecting to other humans makes us more resilient. It makes us mentally stronger and more able to deal with crisis. And when we create products, we have to recognize how powerful this drive for human connection is. When people reach a certain stress level, they are not going to read the website or chat with a bot. They will call. And the best thing a company can do to calm them in that moment is to answer that call, give them the human connection that they crave. Now, companies' resources aren't infinite, so that means carefully prioritizing human-to-human support. To get the most bang for your buck, think about your customer journey and find the moments that meet two criteria. Look for times when somebody is doing something that is both high stakes, typically something where a mistake will cost a lot of money or cause an injury, and also a low confidence activity, something they don't do very often, where there's a lot of uncertainty if they're doing it right. Now, human connection isn't the only way to calm users. The visual design of an interface can impact users in both large and small ways. It can start with something as simple as just rounding the corners in our designs. A study looking at the aesthetic of objects put participants in an MRI machine and asked them to choose between two objects with the same meaning or function. Looking at objects with sharp, spiky edges lit up the part of their brains that signaled potential danger, where the curved objects did not. Now, not surprisingly, when asked which version of the object they liked better, participants had a very consistent preference for the curved objects. In her 2018 TED Talk, designer Ingrid Fatelli takes this a step further, exploring what she calls the aesthetics of joy. This is my favorite part of the presentation. She identified visual patterns that consistently trigger a feeling of joy in the viewer. Properties like round things, bright pops of color, symmetrical shapes, a sense of abundance and multiplicity, and a feeling of lightness or elevation. Now, helping users feel less stressed or even joyful might be a noble pursuit, but does it actually change behavior? Can it make you feel safer? Can it affect the bottom line? So this is a picture from Tirana, the capital of Albania. And in 2004, former artist Edi Rama was elected mayor. And when he entered office, his city was dingy, crime-ridden, and resource-starved after years under communist rule. Rama used one of the cheapest methods possible to restore his city: paint. He designed the first building himself, but the trend quickly spread, and lo and behold, a strange power came with these bold painted restorations. People stopped littering, citizens began paying taxes, and violent crime actually went down without adding any additional police force, all from a bit of brightly colored paint. A joyful aesthetic may seem like a bit of fluff, but it can have a surprising impact on human behavior. As designers, we may not be on the front page or the front lines. We aren't the heroes fighting the wars or the doctors riding the wave of a pandemic or the astronauts venturing outside the safety of our little blue marble. But if we craft our experiences carefully and mindfully, we can be there for people in the moments they need us most. We can protect them, we can calm them, and we can harness the potential inside them, helping them to do truly amazing things. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing and thought-provoking as well. Designing for stress and how do you get about it. I hope more and more people listen to such talks to understand and design how we can create things which are less stressful and how to deal about it. Now we'll go forward with our next segment where we'll talk about design journeys and question and answer format. So yeah, let's start with our first question, and that is, can you tell me about your design journey and how it started?
Sure. So I had a pretty unusual start to my design journey. I was actually a musical theater major. I graduated with a degree in directing and theater management. I moved to Chicago as soon as I could and started doing what's called storefront theater here. So instead of big, 50-seat theaters, we're doing shows for 40 people at a time. And in order to pay the bills, because that kind of theater doesn't pay at all. In order to pay the bills, I was doing day jobs in theater offices. So I was working as office manager, and I got into theater marketing. From there, I worked on a website called seechicagodance.com, where we had listings for all the different types of dance performances that were happening around the city. And I was on the client side as a vendor that the group hired, built that site. And then that was back when webmaster was still a title. And so kept the website up to date. From there, a friend asked me to join a startup that he was starting, an interactive web agency called Aztec Consulting. And so I was his first employee. I was 24 years old and a COO, Chief Operating Officer. It's the best title I've had so far in my career. I'm not sure I'll ever get back to the C-suite. But it was a startup. I was his first employee. I wore a ton of hats. I did everything from, sending invoices to writing RFPs to managing clients. And that was really where my sweet spot was managing clients, pulling out of them what they needed and what their customers needed from the websites that we were building for them. And I was creating things like sitemaps and wireframes before I even knew there were names for those things. It was just how my brain wanted to organize the information that I was pulling out from them and needing to communicate it to the design team and the development team. When I realized that was a job, I wanted to do more of that full time. And so I actually went back, got a little bit more education in UX, so I could officially call myself a UX designer, and decided to at that time we'd grown from 2 people to 12 over 7 years. So I'd been there 7 years, and I wanted to go someplace where I could really do some design. I could work with more experienced UX designers, have people to learn from. When you start at the top, you have to teach yourself everything. I didn't have anybody to learn from. That's when I went to FCB. And boy, did I learn. I learned so much. I think I learned more about my design, like you would have thought there were 3 years between the designs I was creating that first month versus the third month. 3 years of growth, I swear. Just because I had people to learn from. I had models to follow. I had templates. I could see how other people were doing it, and I was getting feedback for the first time in my career journey. I grew so much in those early months. And so I was there for like 3 years. You mentioned some of the cool stuff I got to work on: Jack Daniels, Meow Mix. I was making, things for people to make gifts of their cats, like it was fun, and it was an ad agency, and we had a beer fridge and foosball table and all that kind of fun downtown office stuff. And then from there, working in an environment like that, it was sexy, it was fun, but I didn't feel like I was making a very big impact on either the businesses or people's lives, and so when Allstate recruited me, I was really interested because it gave me an opportunity to move closer to work that I felt like was making an impact on people's lives. I mean, people turn to their insurance. I don't know how insurance works in India, but in America, you know, when somebody, if something happens to your car or your house or your home, you file a claim, and it's your insurance company that helps you get back on your feet. We help you find a rental car. We help you, you know, pay for the damages and get your home rebuilt. And so those moments when people are panicked and they're turning to us, those are powerful moments. And you really, as a UX designer, you have a lot of ability to make an impact there. So that was really appealing to me. And I wanted to have more impact in my work. And so I decided to come over to Allstate, and been there almost 4 years. Oh, more than 4 years now. So very happy.
Wow, that's really unusual. Starting from theater and then proceeding to different way, and now working in insurance company. So I want to talk about your theater background. How is it helping in design?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I swear I learned the things that I learned doing theater almost every single day, because, the creative process is a creative process, whether you're doing a show, whether you're building a website or a building or a piece of art, that creative process is the same. And especially design and theater are a lot more similar than I think people realize, because it tends to be teams of people working together, teams with very different skill sets. You've got, designers and developers in the web world. In theater, you've got, actors and set designers and lighting technicians. It's the same sort of group of really diverse individuals that all have, you've got the egos, and you've got, a producer, just like a client, like it's all like very similar roles, surprisingly similar roles. So I use that all the time. I also learned a lot of about creating something for an audience, right? I think one of the things that's wonderful about theater that's different than TV and film is you're so connected to the audience in that creation process. I even was working on shows where the audience is actually part of the show. I did like a crazy alien game show once where, we're like using the people from the audience. And so, that sort of interaction and really understanding your audience and anticipating and creating an immersive experience for them, very similar to what I do now and how I approach the work for my web clients.
I'm also very curious that when and how you got interested in designing for people under stress. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, some of it stemmed from my shift into Allstate, thinking about those moments that matter for our clients, for our customers rather. But, also even when I came into Allstate, a lot of the work that I was doing is around, selling more insurance. My background's in marketing, so they naturally put me into the work for marketing the insurance, which is a good fit for me. And I feel like I do well at that. But, I'd like my career to continue to head in the direction of helping people and making an impact on people's lives. And I recognize, as somebody who hires people, right, I recognize that if I want people to put me in roles like that, I need to develop skills in myself and expertise in myself to make me a good fit for those roles. And since my background, I had a lot of design expertise and I was great at client management, but I wanted to build out those skills around designing for those moments that matter. And so that's why I got interested in the research. And then it was just so fascinating. And especially after a year of us all surviving a pandemic, or trying to, that just became so clear how important that knowledge is for designers. It was the technology that was allowing the world to function. But that technology, a lot of it that was being used was not designed to be used under the conditions that it was being used under, right? And certainly not designed to be used by people under the amount of stress that we've all been under for the last year and a half. And I think there's things that can make things work better if designers knew about them. And so that's why I wanted to write the book and really help tie some of the things I was learning in the stress research into how to apply that to everyday designs, because I think any design in any industry, any field can benefit from that.
Sure. Now also let's talk about the different roles that you talked about, from C-suite to in-house to agency. There's a lot of, and UX strategist right now. So you've juggled a lot of roles and in a lot of different places. So can you talk about a little bit about these roles and places that you've worked in?
Sure. Yeah, when I think about UX roles, because I have a lot of designers starting out their careers ask me, about UX. And breaking in and what sort of jobs that they might want to get. So I think about UX roles in 3, maybe 4 categories. So I've done 3 different types. So there's startups, there's agencies, and there's in-house, right? So a 4th one you could say is government services, municipal services, right? Though they're very similar to in-house agencies. There's not a ton of difference, but I haven't worked in there. So maybe there is a ton of difference and I just don't know about it yet. But when it comes to those 3, it's pretty interesting. They each have pros and cons. So in the startup world, high risk, possibly high reward, possibly nothing, right? Usually you're working your tail off, long hours, but it's usually a small team. You get to wear lots of hats. You get to work fast and nimble. You're creating something new that never existed before. There's no rules. You're making it all up yourself. Which is a really exciting thing to do, especially if you're young, don't have a family to support. That's definitely something that early in your life or later after maybe the kids are gone through school, that's really attractive time to engage in that sort of startup life. And then the agency world, I mentioned this when I was talking about my career path, right? Like it's a great place to learn from other designers. You're going to go someplace, it's got established practices, a big group, and lots of agencies. That's where you get to work on the sexy big brands. I mean, working at that agency, I only worked there like 2.5, 3 years. But I got huge names, world recognized names on my resume during that time there. And that has absolutely shaped the rest of that will shape the rest of my career. Just having those names, once they're on my resume, they're there. And I get to continue cashing those checks for the rest of my career. But agencies burn people out. They hire people young. They don't pay you a lot. They expect you to work all night. And, so it's fun. But it's also not always healthy, especially, big city American agencies. You're expected to go out drinking afterwards, beer fridge I mentioned as a plus, but it's also a minus, and, it's different agencies are going to have different cultures, but, as a generalization, it tends to be not always the healthiest culture. And there tends to be a lot of sort of backstabbing politics that happen at the agency level. Again, not every agency, but as a general rule. And then the 3rd one, in-house, that you're going to have a lot better work-life balance. If you get to the right group, you're going to have the stability of, a large team with people to learn from. But the work is slow. You're often working on legacy systems. It's, it's designed by committee. You're usually working in big groups. You don't have the sort of ego-centered design decisions that you get in your agency and your startup, but you do have to design by committee. So it's like a trade-off there as well. I've also noticed that it's much easier to go to in-house from the other areas, from startup and agency, than it is to go from in-house to agency, especially agency. It's a little easier to go to startups, especially if it's within your same industry and you can say you've got, cred that you're, industry knowledge you're bringing into the startup. But agencies, they don't usually want to hire somebody that only has in-house experience on their resume because they think you're going to move slow. And quite frankly, if that's all you've ever done, you're probably going to move slower than they want you to move. So if you're early in your career, you're thinking about designing your career, you're trying to enter the industry for the first time, and you think you want to do 2, 3 of those options, I'd encourage you to start at agency or startup. Agencies think startups are sexy. So oftentimes, especially if it's got any kind of like Silicon Valley cred attached to it, then, going at a startup will get you in the door at agency. But start at that end of it and work your way towards in-house. But I gotta say, it's not a bad gig to go straight to in-house. It's a great way to start retirement savings, start, getting stocks, like all that sort of stuff starts much earlier in your career if you go the in-house route. If you're looking for financial stability and you want to start a family, that's usually a fairly good place to start.
What about consulting though? Design consulting?
I would lump that into agency work.
Okay.
So it's usually a consulting agency.
Okay, you did talk about different things and advices. Now I'm honing towards being women in design. Have you ever faced any challenges being women in design?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's definitely a reality. That is a thing. Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, a story. I was working at a place and there were some folks in another department and they just didn't seem to like me. And I could not figure out what was going on because I hadn't really worked all that close with them. Like I hadn't done anything to get them to not really like me, but it was very apparent that they kind of, they were not kind people. And I eventually had a friend from that department come to me and she said, Katie, I really want to start a family. And I see that you're a mother and you're making this work. She's like, I am in this department and these people are saying things in front of me like, I hate working with mothers. I'll never work with mothers unless I absolutely have to. And I think the impression I got from her was that they wanted people who would, stay all night and didn't have anything else pulling on their time. And it suddenly made a lot more sense why they weren't interested in working with me, right? And, I just talked to her about, the ways that I sort of managed my time. And I talked to her a lot about understanding your own value as a worker, as a designer, understanding that your value does not come from the number of hours that you sit at a desk. Your value comes from your design work, from your strategy, from the impact that you make on the users and your clients. And that knowing my value gave me a lot of strength to say no. I also knew my value as a mother and I knew I needed to be home by a certain time. And I knew that I could, I was coming in on time and leaving on time. Whereas, you've got a lot of the younger designers coming in late, taking 2-hour lunches and then working till 9, right? And so I knew that if I worked fast and focused, I could get twice as much done during the day as they were getting done and leave by 5 and all my clients are happy. If you're judging me by how many hours that I'm sitting at the desk, maybe I'm judged subpar. But if you're judging me by the quality of my work, the people who I was actually working with, they were telling me I was doing amazing. And, knowing my value helped me because I saw it when I left that company. I got a 30% raise when I left there and, moved up significantly in the hierarchy of the next company. And so, it was proven out. But I think also as women, it's important to, when you do make it out of a toxic environment like that, that you reach back, right? And you pull you pull your sisters with you. And happily, that woman who would come to me with that story, she was incredibly talented, and I was able to put a bug in the ear of my next employer and got her into the next place with me, and now we get to work together, and I love it. So, it's really just about knowing your value and knowing that it's not about the number of hours that you sit at a desk, and not being afraid to walk away when the writing's on the wall.
That's a great thing to know, like, not getting down by somebody else's vision of you, but standing up for yourself and knowing that what is right for you. Now let's zoom in towards pandemic. How has that affected you?
Gosh, I mean, it feels like the pandemic affects everything, right? But it also feels like it's never ending, right? You just like do it. I'm working at home now. That's a huge difference. And every day is just like the next. It's a little bit like that Bill Murray Groundhog Day movie, where it's just, you get up and you do the same thing. But I do feel like I've adjusted by now. I'm looking forward to offices opening back up. I think within the next couple of months, Allstate may be opening back up, and getting back to being around people. I'm an extrovert. If you can't tell, I'm an extrovert. And so I get a lot of energy from other people. I know that, the working from home has improved things for a lot of people. For me, I'm looking forward to getting back to being around other humans. But it sounds like we're going to have a lot more flexibility, and I hope that continues, because that really opens the door for diverse talent, mothers, especially parents, not just mothers who take care of children, parents. I cut 2 hours of commuting out of my day. I know it's a huge thing in India, the commute. And so, my family got all that back, and that was huge. It's changed for good and bad. And it also really reinforced how important the stress work was. I really saw the necessity for it through that experience for the last year and a half.
Now, what has been keeping you motivated during these times? It's very difficult to, stay motivated. How have you been doing that?
I have a saying that kept me sane from long before the pandemic, and definitely during the pandemic. Creation without clients. Mm-hmm. So I like to create things. I do crafting, I do costumes, I do terrariums. I'm actually in my workroom right now. I'm like looking around. I've got a sewing machine. I've got, boxes of glue, I'm always making different things. And right now I'm taking a woodworking class. I'm learning to do woodworking with hand tools. I do relief carvings. I'm making a mushroom box right now because I'm home growing mushrooms to eat, oyster mushrooms. So, I just like to learn new things, make things with my hands, get off the computer for a while and like make things with my hands. So that's really how I keep myself motivated. And I feel like the things that I learn then like always seem to like show up and influence my work as well, whether it's composition or pacing or the creative process or learning new things. Like it all ties together and just makes me a better designer overall.
Yeah, I totally agree on that part. I feel that, things just cross connect and amazing ideas come up when, different skill sets come together. So did that spark, this writing of book for you? How and when did you start writing this book?
Gosh. It started as a talk. I think probably the idea germinated early 2019. Mm-hmm. And I knew I wanted to write a talk. And I was actually working a conference, which I was not speaking at, but I was working a booth for recruiting people to work at Allstate. And it was right across from Rosenfeld Media, who will eventually become my publisher. Spoilers. So it was right across the aisle from Rosenfeld Media. And I had in my head, because I had started to research the talk, and I knew there was so much more there than a 45-minute talk. You know what I mean? Like, I knew in my bones that this was like a deep, awesome, rich, super interesting topic. And so it took me a while. It took me hours to like work up the courage, but I was just like, I'm just gonna go over there and talk to them. And so I went over there. I was like, I'm sure you get this all the time, but I have an idea for a book. And like I said, and amazingly, it was Marta, my managing editor, who was working the booth that day. She's the managing editor for the whole company. It's a nice thing about small publishers. And so, I got to talk to her directly and pitch her my book idea at this random booth at Midwest UX conference. And she was so generous. She was like, have you written a book before? And I was like, no, I have not. And she was like, it is really hard. It's like, okay. And so I was like, what do you suggest I do? And so she was like, look, why don't you try writing a chapter and a table of contents? And then they have an application on the website, a really simple application. If anybody's looking to write a book, go to rosenfeldmedia.com. Check out their contact us page. They have a 1-sheet application. I do suggest writing a sample chapter first to see if you like writing, because she's right, it is a lot of work. So you gotta like doing it. It has to be an enjoyable experience. But I did, I really liked it. I got into flow state. That's like where you always want to be, is flow state. And I get there when I write, especially when I'm writing first drafts and it's coming out, it's the research and the design, and it's all coming together. I was like, oh, this is so fun. Not every chapter came out like that, but the first one did. And so I was convinced that it was going to be super easy for me to write this book. It was a lot of work. But she was very generous, and she talked me through the whole thing, and we stayed in contact through LinkedIn. And eventually I had enough confidence to submit the proposal. It took almost 6 months for them to get back to me, which I'm told is actually pretty typical. And they said, yeah, we like this book. We want to write it. In fiction writing, you usually are expected to have a whole manuscript, and you send out the whole manuscript. But I've found in trade books, nonfiction writing for business trade books, they want to talk to you before you've written the book.
Oh.
And so they want to see a writing sample, and they want like a table of contents. But if anybody's thinking about writing a book, you don't have to have it written. Go find a publisher who is in the area you're interested in, and talk to them, because they're going to want to shape it. They're going to want to know who your market is and help you figure all that out. It was a great experience.
Awesome. Can you tell us more about your book and how it can help designers?
Oh, yeah. Book should be out hopefully November, if I hit all my deadlines, over the next couple of months. Life and death design, what life-saving technology can teach everyday designers. So it's very similar to what you saw in the talk. I go deep into the stress response. In the book, I break it down into 5 stages of the stress response: the startle response, the intuitive assessment, fight, flight, or freeze reaction, reasoned response, and recovery. And I cover each of those phases of the stress response in detail, and talk specifically about what designers should know when designing for each of those parts of the stress response. And then there's 2 bonus chapters, one on alarm design and one on designing for heroes, which is basically about bringing out, when people are in a moment of crisis, sometimes they step up and sometimes they fold, right? And how, as a designer, can you create an environment that encourages people to step up in those moments that matter? So I end on that. That's like a good high note to end the book on. So so if that sounds of interest, check out Rosenfeld Media. You can sign up for book announcements there.
Wow, can't wait to read this. And now let's talk about a little bit of future. Where do you see yourself in future career? How has been your long-term goal envisioned? Have you envisioned your long-term goal and your future career?
Yeah. So, originally my career goal was to, be on Broadway, be a famous actress. I've definitely shifted off that path. These days, I actually, my career goal is to retire early. Now, that is not like because I hate tech, but it's just because I like creating things with my hands, and I like creating these immersive experiences. It goes back to my theater roots. And my husband and I have a dream to get some land and to create these like story-based houses that people can come and rent and kind of have a escape. But in order to do that sort of work, we have to have money, like, capital investment. And so, we have, I think it's like a 12-year plan, maybe 11 at this point, to get the money together, but still be young enough to pull something like that off, right? Like, I'm watching my parents, you get certain age and you don't want to do stuff like that anymore. So like, want to get the money together while we're young. But there's been something about having that, knowing that that's the end goal, that has really shifted my perspective on my day-to-day work. Because I don't know, I feel like people get really stuck in this idea of like, they've always got to be getting promoted and they've always got to be climbing the ladder. And it's like, where are you climbing to? Where are you climbing to? And I see people with, I had a C-suite job, I guess, at a 12-person firm, but I see people with these SVP, EVP, C-suite roles at these giant corporations. And frankly, like, a lot of that work doesn't look like a lot of fun. Like there gets to be a point where you get so far away from the work, you're just managing people, you're not actually solving the problems anymore. There's some of it I really like. I really love managing teams and I love helping the teams get the work out. But there's only so far away I want to get from that. And so I'd love to like build a department before the end of my career. I can definitely see myself in 5 years, maybe sooner, going someplace that wants to grow an in-house team and like building it up from scratch. I think that would be super fun. It's definitely something I want to do, but I don't need to be, CTO or CDO. I just want to have a group and stay close to the designers, but help people build meaningful products together.
Wow. We all need inspiration. And that's the question I ask everybody. Where do you get your inspirations from?
Yeah. You mean like, where don't I get my inspirations from? We talked a little bit about creation with our clients. That's a big one for me. Also my coworkers. I work with amazingly talented people and I learn stuff from them every single day. And we laugh and we have fun and we talk about each other's kids and dogs. And, I get a lot of inspiration from them. And then of course, I love podcasts. I love books. Been reading a ton for this book that I'm writing. So that's been a lot of what I've been doing is research. I enjoy speaking quite a bit. So thank you for giving me this opportunity today. But because I'm performance motivated, I'm a performer at heart, right? Like that's my background. And so I use that. I know that, research for the sake of research is hard for me, frankly. Like, it's just because I set a learning goal for myself doesn't mean I'm going to achieve it. But if I know I have to get up on a stage in 6 months and talk about it like I'm an expert, that is going to motivate me to do my research and get my crap together. So I pair these things about myself, and I use those as motivators. So yeah, I think audiences inspire me, and those sorts of opportunities. But it's also just being self-aware and knowing what levers in yourself to pull to get yourself to do the things you want to do. You know what I mean? So yeah.
That's a great thing. If you could go back like in past and advise your younger self, what would that be?
I don't know that I would. You know what I mean? Like, I think that so many of the most valuable lessons I learned, I just had to learn them. I just had to experience the thing I experienced. You know, one of the things that I touched on it a little bit in the talk, right? Like, you learn things differently when you're told them than when you experience them. You learn them in different parts of your brain. And so I guess, I just say, enjoy it, enjoy learning all the things, all the painful lessons you're going to learn, like sometimes that's just what you need to do. You just need to get through them yourself, and know that there's value in that, because you learn things in different ways and you build your intuition, and that intuition is going to serve you very well throughout your life.
Yeah. Even I think sometimes, there cannot be substitute for experience, right?
I'm definitely one of those impatient learners. I remember very distinctly going to a college professor, like second semester freshman year. And I went up to her and I was like, you gave me this one piece of feedback and I need you to explain to me how to fix that. And she was like, that's what you'll spend your entire sophomore year learning. I was like, no, I want the answer now so that I can fix it immediately. So I've always been like, I'm just like, no, just give me the answer, and now that I'm a little older and I've had those questions asked of me, right? Like I'm just like, sometimes I'll see it, especially when I start a new job or a new project. I'll be like, I just want all the knowledge crammed into my brain so that I can just do the thing, And I was just like, nope, you just got to do it. You got to do the work. You got to live through it. You just got to not know for a while and be okay not knowing. So yeah, I mean, it's just part of life, part of learning.
Yeah. My last and final question for today, and that's any advice and recommendations of media to watch, books to read, or theaters to go to?
Yes, absolutely. Books to read. We were talking about suggested books in an earlier team meeting at Allstate today, and I shared this one. Oh no. Oh, with the background, it's not going to happen. Maybe if I do it in front of myself there. Hi. Sources of Power by Gary Klein. I quote this a ton in my book. He looks at the science of intuition, and looks at what he calls naturalistic decision making. Because I think when we think about decisions, we're typically thinking about the ones that we agonize over, that we have to make a lot of pro-con lists about. But if you think about it, you make thousands of decisions every day without conscious effort. You decide to get out of bed. It doesn't feel like a decision because it's just what you're supposed to do next. You just brush your teeth next, but you decided to do that, but it happened in your subconscious. And when you're faced with a big problem that you have to solve, and you get that feeling of like, oh, I know what to do, and you jump in with both feet, you've built that through expert experience. And that is intuition. That's intuition that you're tapping into in those moments. And to understand how it's built and then how to utilize it, and also how to control it for things like bias that creep in when you're like letting too much of your work be intuition based. Intuition is so powerful, and I don't think we give it nearly enough respect. So I highly recommend that book. Things to listen to would be, 99% Invisible is classic. I've been listening to this podcast called 20,000 Hertz, and it is a podcast about sound and really cool episodes about Foley design, like sound effects and like the soundtracks of trailers, like alarm design, like all sorts of crazy stuff in 20,000 Hertz. That's a really fun one. I'm like, this is so interesting. Like every time I listen to an episode, I'm like, this is so cool. How can I put this in the book? It's so cool. So that one I highly recommend as well.
So we come to the end of the show. Thank you, Katie, for coming and sharing with us your thoughts today. We confer upon you the title of Inspiring Designer. Thanks for inspiring us today.
Thanks so much. This has been so much fun, a pleasure, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Folks watching us today, I hope this has inspired you, and stay inspired, keep designing. Until next time. Thank you, guys.